Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the study session for February 5th, 2024. We have two agenda items tonight. One is the WaterWise Landscape Code amendments, and two is Facilities Master Plan overview and recommendations. We'll start tonight, as we always do, with public comments. So we'll look to see if we have anybody in the gallery signed up to speak. We have nobody signed up to speak. I don't believe we have anybody else in the gallery to speak, and we have nobody signed up online. So we'll go to agenda item number one. Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites. Lauren Mikulak, Community Development Director, is going to kick this off. We have several members of our team in person and online to help with any questions.
Thank you. Let me mute this. So it's been about 8 months since we got to talk about this topic. Last June, I think Council Member Ohm had said it was Christmas in June at the time. In the intervening time, it's taken us a little while to get back to you because we had our seasonal landscape inspection program. And then we got back to the code amendment in the fall. Janet Gassman is our landscape planner, and some of you got to meet her last summer. Her work on the landscape inspection program over the last several years, I think, really has helped inform this code amendment and base it in reality. We're also well-timed because this same topic is starting to come up in state-level conversation, so we feel really well aligned with what's evolved at the state over the last 6 to 8 months or so. Last summer was really, really helpful. We walked away with very clear direction on most of our 9 topics. The memo for tonight describes the consensus that we got and how we plan to implement that. Tonight we just want to focus on a few smaller things. First, we'll give a quick description of how the proposed code amendment will apply. So a summary of sort of the practical implications, not just the policy direction. And then we'd love your direction on 2 specific topics: backyard artificial turf. We talked a little bit about that last summer. And then parameters related to front yards, WaterWise landscaping, particularly for residents who are sort of seeking assistance when they want to remove their turf. You'll see those 2 policy questions pop up in the slides. We'll go through the whole slides and then we'll circle back to discussion if that works. That's okay. There we are. You want to take it away?
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to just run through these. Actually, I'm not even going to run through these. These are the 9 topic areas that we discussed in June at the study session. Council expressed positive support for all of staff's recommendations and for WaterWise landscape design in general. And that's expected to lead to reduced water consumption, encourage water efficiency, and establish stronger links between land use planning and our limited water supply. And all those things are very hot topics for Colorado right now. So we, just a second. So what does that mean? Based on the consensus from the last meeting, we're raising the bar the most for new multi-residential and commercial developments, and the least for existing low-density residential. We are not proposing many regulatory changes for the new and existing low-density development. We've always held multi-unit residential and commercial to a higher standard when it comes to landscape requirements. For example, we require the provision and review of landscape plans for new construction for these types of uses. What is changing related to this is we are limiting irrigated turf for multi-unit development to 30% of the total landscape, which is down from 60% and in line with commercial and mixed use. This change has been happening organically as developers had moved toward more WaterWise design. And we are increasing the allowance for non-living material to 50% of the total landscape coverage, up from 35%. We're also prohibiting non-functional turf, and that is turf that is mostly ornamental and rarely walked on. And we are requiring WaterWise design rather than encouraging it in the past. We're also requiring a hydrozone plan and water budget with the landscape plan. What's not changing is irrigated turf is still limited to 30% for commercial. And we're not making changes to the number of trees and shrubs that are required. Yeah. Sorry. There we go. For existing multi-unit and commercial development, we're seeing two main changes in the landscape arena. If a owner or property manager wants to make voluntary changes to the landscaping, for example, if they have a change in tenants or a change in ownership, or a desire to move toward a more water-efficient landscaping, and if the landscaping is to be substantially altered, it would require them to comply with the city's new water-wise standards, and a new plan would be required for review. More often, however, we are working with owners or property managers to solve landscaping issues through the landscape program, and most of our recommendations have already aligned with water-wise principles, and most people are eager to implement small changes that reduce their water bill. Sorry. There's no changes to that approach. For low-density residential, and for new low-density, and we mean single-unit homes and duplexes, we have had few specific landscape standards, and most of those remain. However, we are investing in additional resources to support and guide xeric and water-wise design. Staff will be developing a landscape guidebook, as recommended and discussed slightly last time, to provide detailed information about water-wise landscape design for both commercial and residential design. And the guidebook will be utilized to format handouts for specific uses. We had attached a sample of that for low density in your packet. What stays the same is that irrigated turf is still going to be limited to 50% of the total landscape. And in this case, water-wise design will be encouraged, not required, and that's not a change. And then no change to the tree count or locations of the trees on the site. For existing single-unit homes and duplexes, the Wheat Ridge Sustainability Program continues to invest in programs to support homeowners who would like to move toward a more water-efficient landscape. Those are a couple of the options that are out there. Use-specific handouts will provide additional clarification for homeowner renovations. What doesn't change is irrigated turf is still limited to 50%, and water-wise design will be encouraged, not required. The majority of regulations described above have affect new or revised landscaping for multi-unit and commercial properties. As it relates to low-density residential contexts, staff is seeking additional council input on two specific topics. Policy question 1. At the June 2023 study session, staff recommended and council was open to allowing limited use of artificial turf in rear and side yards of single-unit and duplex sites. Per our additional research, staff recommends allowing artificial turf in rear and side yards not visible from a public street and at a maximum of 400 square feet in area. The 400 square feet is not a magic number, but was intentionally chosen for several reasons. It's consistent with size requirements for common uses such as residential putting greens and dog runs. It's consistent with allowable coverage for other residential accessory uses and recreational equipment. And then it's also easily compatible with standard material shapes and sizes available to the home landscaper. Our second policy question relates to low-density front yard design. For single and duplex residential properties, they've largely been unregulated, and with a growing interest in water-efficient landscaping, clarity is needed related to turf removal and xeric or water-wise design. Staff is recommending adding the following provisions to the landscape code to prevent front yards from being fully rocked or mulched with no live coverage. Our recommendation is front yards must contain a minimum 1/3 living plant coverage, and that's as a projected growth at 2 years. For new homes, this allows for more flexibility than the current code, which requires a minimum 2/3 of the yard to be living material. We're proposing the inverse. Mulches, whether organic or non-organic, may be used as a permanent primary cover for when included as an integral part of the landscape. And this isn't exactly clear in the code right now. And then thirdly, native grasses and wildflowers of a height greater than 12 inches must be, we're suggesting that be confined to the rear yard, or that they be planted within a defined and edged bed. We're proposing this in part to help with code enforcement. So there's a difference between weeds and more intentional natural landscape. And we're suggesting these parameters based on having examined existing yards in Wheat Ridge and the metro area. And I've just included a couple pictures, which were also in your packet, but just to give you an idea of living versus non-living materials in a front yard. This is of a newer landscape, starting to fill in. It'll fill in more over time. And as you can guess, it's hard to measure exactly what is 1/3 versus 1/2, but to the best of our ability. And here's another yard that has some irrigated turf in the background, but probably about 1/3 to 1/2 of the front yard has rock with an additional plant material in that part of the design. And here, to me, this is like typical Wheat Ridge ranch with a well-established xeric garden, partial stone, partial mulch, and perennials and water-wise plantings in the balance. So most of section 26502 has remained the same since 1979, and it can be difficult to decipher because the requirements are spread throughout the code. Based on your feedback tonight, staff will draft new regulations as a repeal and reenactment to allow for reorganization and clarification of the requirements for all users. With your direction on these last couple of questions, staff will present the landscape ordinance to Plan Commission and City Council for approval. And that is it.
Thank you. Let's go to questions. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites. And thank you for the presentation and work on this. A really quick question, if you can recall. So we reviewed our weed ordinance 7 years ago, maybe?
Yeah.
6-ish, yeah. And I can't remember, I know I specifically was asking for a lower threshold of what weeds were supposed to be cut down at, but I can't remember what we landed on. I think it was
It's 12 inches.
12 inches
Yes.
still? Okay. So, we're saying native grasses or wildflowers at a height greater than 12 inches, so have to have a border. So if they're under 12 inches, they wouldn't necessarily need to have a border around them?
That is correct.
And then there's one particular neighbor that I'm thinking of that they meticulously weed their native grasses, and their grasses are tall, but they don't necessarily have them in like a border. So would like a simple brick border, like kind of delineating like this area has wild grasses behind it, would that be considered a border under kind of the definition of
I would consider it a border.
okay, all right, great.
The issues that have come up have been where there's no definition,
Yeah,
and it's clearly just not kept.
gotcha, cool. Yeah, I appreciate your recommendations, and I'm supportive on both of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Weaver?
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you. Counselor Hoppe, you asked some of the questions that I was curious about. Does any of this impede someone from converting their yard into a front food forest, as far as if they wanted to? Because there've been some pushback around the code and the weed and things like that, if someone wanted to create all food production beds in their front and they were managing it. I just wanted to make sure that that isn't being impeded at all by any of this. Okay.
And I think that's actually protected by,
It is, I just
Code,
wanted to make
yes.
sure that we
Mhm.
were
yeah, we're not
talking
eliminating
about the
that.
same thing in different parts of the code.
Yeah.
My concern, and this was because I lived in Austin, Texas in the 90s, and they passed a law that allowed you to rock your entire yard. And of course, all of these homes started changing to rock, and what they found over 10 years, that it heated up the urban island, and there were all of these issues. And I also think that there might be some areas in Wheat Ridge where the definition of where we park our car is not super clear. And so I'm just wondering how you balance that with, and I realize I'm asking a tricky question. It's just sort of like, how are we going to tell the difference when we say, okay, 1/3 of your living parameter can be a living thing, and then I decide to rock the rest of it, and then all of a sudden I start parking on the rest of it. I'm just throwing it out there, sort of like, I realize we're defining beds, I think that's a great idea. Are we also sort of defining, you know, we're thinking about the artificial turf area. I appreciate that we're saying put it in the backyard. There's just some, it tends to grow. And I'm just kind of curious how you all are thinking about the person who may read this and see a different opportunity not around water-wise landscaping.
I think our parking regulations are pretty well defined, but I know Lauren's digging through that right now. Maybe we can come back to that if there's more questions, but did you find it?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because this stuff gets tricky, and it gets tricky as soon as sort of a neighbor gets upset or code enforcement gets
Exactly.
involved.
Yeah.
Slow walking this forward has helped, because Janet got to go out with code enforcement a couple times this summer and sort of do some test cases of how would we problem solve this. On the upside, our current landscape regulations, and our intent is sort of not to wipe the slate clean, even though it'll be a repeal. When we are talking about landscaping in the front yard, living or not, it excludes the driveway. That is specifically in the code. So we're not counting the driveway or the sidewalk access. So that's usually our first exercise of when we talk about the area that needs to be landscaping, what is it not including? So I think, could a rocked area evolve over time to a parking area? Probably, but that is allowed so long as it's contained. Usually we see, like, if it's gonna be gravel, it's gotta be like railroad ties or something. So I do think, I'm glad you brought it up, and I think we probably have the tools to make sure we can problem solve that, and we'll be attentive to that language when we draft the new ordinance. Because those are the real life scenarios that will arise, yeah.
I think it's probably like saying, what does a bed look like, right? Is it a defined area
Yeah.
for whatever, and I appreciate that. And I just wanted to clarify one last question. We are talking about all of these things still have to be pervious in the yard area, correct? Like, I can't say cementing half my yard is called rocking my whole yard.
Right,
So
yeah, there are
rainwater
some
has-
backstops that we did not include today about, like a quarter of your yard has to be landscaping and sort of other
Right.
parameters. I think the goal of tonight, and the thing that we probably struggled with the most over time, is people see something and know if they sort of want that or not. Like the Austin example is a great one. You're like, oh, we don't want everything to turn rock, but then
Well, it was a
defining.
great idea when it started, right?
Right.
Like, it was all these things, and it was just the,
Yeah, we do have some backstops, so you can't be all concrete. It's just the struggle of defining sort of what are we asking people? What guideline are we giving somebody when they want to
yeah.
introduce rock or gravel or mulch or less
And one of
grass?
the things, we didn't get into the weeds of, oh, that's the wrong word, so-
Okay.
wrong word. We're actually defining in broader terms and but more specific terms, what are mulches, what's considered as a mulched
Yeah.
yard. It can be inorganic. Denver Botanic Gardens and, uses have, extended toward gravels and non-organic mulches, particularly for Colorado.
Mhm.
But they have limitations. They're not in size, like we're not saying put 10-inch boulders throughout your whole front yard,
Yeah.
Cobble's about as big as we go with, and that is rarely used in a residential context. It's
Yeah.
more in commercial context. So we looked into that a lot, looked at a lot of other codes too, and what do those parameters need to be? And they need to be defined.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have one more question. I'm going to
Sure.
get in the weeds on this
Well,
question because I think another thing that I have seen people do in cities that I've lived in, that they perpetually mulch their yard, and that's actually a huge carbon release because it's continually decomposing and you don't have any green matter. And so I just want us to be aware that the continuous mulch along with the rock is actually creating more erosion and not getting us to the point that we want. So, thank you, and I really appreciate, and I will be supportive of all these. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's go, Counselor Hulteen.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions, and my own yard is my best test case for this. And I did admit in the last one that I might not be compliant with some of this stuff. So one question I have in that calculating, for the second question, calculating the minimum coverage, how do you calculate trees, especially mature trees, in terms of that? Because on my property, I have 3 gigantic blue spruce trees that if you actually count their footprint on the land, are about this big. And if you actually count what I can plant underneath them, they occupy about a fifth of my front yard in terms, so I can't plant anything underneath them. So how would something like a mature tree like that actually impacts not just like its actual space that it takes, but it actually impacts?
Since I haven't tried doing this yet, but I did look at other codes, and I've seen it measured in 2 different ways. Where rarely have I seen that the full canopy of a shade tree is considered coverage. But for evergreen trees, as far as I'm concerned, I would consider their full spread as coverage. Shade trees I've seen measured at like 20% or 40%. I think it's something we would just need to decide how we were going to measure those. In the landscapes that I brought to staff, I took pictures throughout Wheat Ridge and took them to staff and said, what do you think? Does this look like acceptable to you? In most, it's very interesting because a lot of those were mature trees but new landscapes. So people aren't necessarily getting rid of their trees. But the mature trees have a big impact on what coverage feels like. So we would need to decide that. But that's my tendency. I don't know about shade trees exactly.
Yeah, and that's, so the 2 things, when we say the tree count won't change, there's a code provision about how many street trees you have to have per linear foot of your frontage. So the number is one thing that we're looking at. And then in terms of coverage, this is more art than science. And what we have historically done when we're even doing more formal landscape plan review for commercial or multi-unit is, a landscape designer usually draws the radius of the selected plant. They use their discretion, and we'll similarly have to sort of use our discretion when this comes up. The goal is not to make this difficult. The goal is to sort of create a bumper that says, generally in Wheat Ridge, we don't want fully rocked, and we don't want to overly prescribe what your front yard looks like, and we'd like to see some living things. So the goal is to count that, probably have some more plants elsewhere on the yard, not just rocks and trees. But what we'll make sure we're doing, because most of this will be informed through resources and guides and education, and we will make sure that we can explain that clearly and succinctly in that kind of documentation.
So I think, I think it's important enough in part because, we want to encourage tree planting. And so when you've got that 2-year reference, I think maybe including some language around tree plantings, having a different maturity reference so that we're not discouraging tree plantings as the kind of investments in that type of water-wise that we'd like to see, through the opting in.
I think the distinction just needs to be made between proposed, like new trees, and existing trees on the lot. Because a proposed tree, I see that consistently in code as 2 years growth. Some say 2 growing seasons, and I was afraid that would be construed as spring and fall. So we want to make sure that we allow what's this going to look like in 2 years. But for shade trees, it would be hard to know. I mean, it'd be hard to measure it at 10 years or, something like that. So.
Okay. So my next question has to do with the containing of plantings with the 12-inch limitation. Would you mind if your remote will allow you to go back, actually, since you're sitting next to me, back to this picture? With the,
Okay, try again.
That one?
yeah.
Yeah.
So would you consider those plantings over 12 inches contained?
Yes.
Okay. And what makes those contained?
The main thing being the difference between like turf and stone. It's clearly in a bed. It's not
Okay. Okay.
it's not just a wild landscape.
Okay. Okay.
And that 12 inches came because we wanted to respect the current weed ordinance. So, perennials can grow to 3 feet, wildflowers can grow 4 or 5 feet. We want people to be able to grow those kind of things. They're good for pollinators and
Right.
all the
yeah.
other things that are really important. Or
Okay.
food, whatever you're growing in your front yard. The bed doesn't need to be like precise and pristine. What code enforcement was running into is just no definition. And, not even necessary to a sidewalk or
Right. Oh, yeah. No, they live across the street from me. I think your reference case. Well, I think it's good for us to be moving towards this. I think the water-wise consideration is paramount in, our region and in particular our state. And there's a lot that can be done. Big water decisions I think happen outside of Wheat Ridge, but increasingly, the people who are calling Wheat Ridge home are increasingly concerned about this. And I've witnessed the last couple of years a lot of conversions of front yards from water-sucking monograsses into much more, biodiverse. And there's no great solution when we're trying to do sustainable choices, and there's always trade-offs around heat islands, which is why I think, the more we can do to encourage tree plantings, we're solving multiple problems with that. We are Tree City USA, so I just want to make sure that whatever comes out of this isn't doing anything to discourage trees as an exciting option and something people would feel motivated and not discouraged to choose as part of that.
We will definitely take that into consideration.
Okay.
I don't want to discourage it either.
I know no one here does. So then my other question goes back to the artificial turf one. So one thing I think it's the first pool of questions. We had talked about on non-functional turf for multifamily and commercial, how we define that, because I just called attention to when we have multifamily apartment buildings coming in that are allowing pets. If we don't have places for them to curb their pet, then what we do is we're, chasing them off their own property onto, throughout the neighborhood. So I just want to make sure we're not discouraging some, what might seem like non-functional turf for multifamily, so that we're actually accommodating household pets that might be showing up in there. And then just a question on the 400 square feet. It mentions duplex. Is that per side? I mean, I don't want to get super in the weeds, but there are some, duplexes, and if there was 800 square feet worth of turf across both of them, it would be a substantial amount of artificial turf, like relative to the exposure area of the land. So I'm just curious how that definition falls.
I think it would, we have some room to write that. Right now, accessory structures are per unit, so the allowance of an accessory structure is usually to each unit. And we would probably do the same thing for the artificial turf. We were looking at our playground, the infamous half-pipe code amendment, where we said how big your backyard recreation can be. That was 400 likely per unit, right, if either side has a playground. And we went on Home Depot and said, how big is a roll of turf that I could go as a weekend warrior and buy? So you're right, it could, if both sides of it, all duplexes ended up with that. We did talk to engineering, and they felt pretty comfortable about the de minimis impact in terms of impervious surface. So it would likely end up being, the short answer to your question is, I was envisioning it as per unit.
Sorry. I'm just learning how to use this mic. Would it be possible to have like a not to exceed percentage, so that we're not getting into a situation where like what seems like a reasonable amount for an average Wheatridge home turns into like, too much? So I think it would be good to look at some sort of not to exceed percentage.
I think I have this right. We are not considering artificial turf as landscape coverage. So it couldn't exceed, like, it couldn't be a whole backyard, because then they would be exceeding their 50% landscape requirement for the total site. So there's ways we're trying to prohibit that from happening. I could see where in a duplex, sometimes the backyards are smaller than maybe in a single unit neighborhood. So I think that would protect it, but it's good for us to consider when we're looking, okay, how is this actually going to play out? We don't want that to happen, that it would completely, but if it did completely cover the backyards, they'd have to definitely landscape their front yards, so.
Okay, well, if that check is in there, then I think I am satisfied. Thanks for your thoughtful answers.
Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites. First off, thank you, staff, Janet. That this was, it's really amazing how much effort you guys have put into it, looking not just at the water, but also looking at, the mulches, the artificial turf, the gravels. There's a lot of thought that's went into it, and I'm really proud that our city is raising the bar. I know sometimes we're not as fortunate, we're trying, when something in the state passes and we're now trying to, pull that into our code, and we're already ahead of it, and we're actually in line, so that's great. Really appreciate that. A couple questions I did have was on the artificial turf. I am agreeable to the 400 square feet. I do see there being instances of where someone might want to have, where you have dogs in the backyard. I have a family member that they have a very, very shaded area, and the grass would be really tough. And artificial turf would be a good solution of not just being muddy all the time, in a small area. And I've actually recommended it to him, that would be a good solution. So I think that's a great idea. I also am really in favor of having the HydroZone water budget. That's something that there's quite a few communities that are doing that, and I think that will definitely kind of raise the bar for our city. The 33% living, this is definitely a little more on the kind of more on the leading edge. There's not very many communities that have that threshold. I typically see the bar being like 75% living, and then what happens is just planted with a ton of shrubs, and then the feedback is there's a lot of maintenance. I do understand what Councilmember Weaver was saying about the gravel. I am aware that there's products like gravel pave that you can actually use as kind of like a driveway. You can put crusher fines and stuff in there, and so the lines could get a little blurred, and how do you define that edge? And that kind of leads into the size of the inorganic mulches, the rock mulches. It looks like we're okay with the 1 to 3 inch. I do see some instances of 3/8 inch rock chip mulch being used in Denver, in the streetscapes. I don't know if and I know that anything over 3 is frowned upon, perhaps because of projectile usage. And I don't know if there's been any conversation with like engineering. Either way, I know sometimes I have concerns over organic mulches in the streetscapes and having heavy rains. And what does that do? Does that wash into the street and cause issues for storm? And so I have no argument against the 1 to 3 inch. I'm just kind of asking, have you considered different sizes and somebody want to use something smaller, maybe not perhaps in the streetscape in the yard. If they want to use something really small in their yard, would a smaller than 1 inch, would that be acceptable?
Yes, there's actually a material referred to as squeegee,
Yeah,
and that's smaller. And
Okay.
that's more of a pea gravel, definitely, and that is included in our acceptable inorganic mulch. And actually highly recommended from what I'm learning.
yes. And then on what is the current or what is being proposed or current for compost requirements?
We brought that back a couple years ago. Maybe, were you on council at that time? Do you remember? It might have been before your time.
Yeah,
So that we've had a recent discussion on that. We can,
okay.
we can,
I just don't recall, I don't remember seeing any, something
whatever.
cubic yards per 1,000 square feet in this one, but I
Right.
kind of talked a little bit about it.
The compost regulations, I think, got moved forward by sustainability program, and I don't think it landed in the zoning code. Now I can't remember where it landed, but we will make sure that there's no conflict. We have not been talking about compost.
The only
In this code
place,
amendment
the
so
only
far.
place where I've seen it is in new development as to what the concentration should be to amending the soils. And I
Right.
have seen a consistent recommendation. I don't recall what it is right now.
I believe it's 4. And the reason I think it's 4 is because Denver Water, who is our upstream provider, they require, if you're directly working with them, 4 cubic yards per 1,000 square feet, or they will not give you a CO. So it is, I don't know why downstream of that we wouldn't have to do it, but I've typically seen that when you're directly working with Denver Water, and that seems to be an industry standard. And the reason why I feel that is important is because the compost in the ground helps to hold the moisture, and that's why there's a lot of consensus on that. That's the only, I'm really happy that we have that non-functional turf term in there. I think that's really on the forefront, and I'm glad that we're going to be on that team, that we are concerned, but I'm also happy that we're not forcing residents, just so they'll understand, we're not forcing them that they have to get rid of the grass, but we're encouraging them. So I think the language that's in here I think it feels pretty equitable to everybody. So thank you so much. That's all my questions and comments. Thank you, guys.
All right, Councilor Dozman.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites. So most of my questions have been addressed, but I did have a couple in regards to just a cost differentiation for some of those high-density and commercial areas with the new requirements. Do you foresee them having a reduction in costs, or will this increase their costs?
For installation or for maintenance?
Both, either. I was thinking probably for building purposes initially, but if you want to talk about maintenance, it's pertinent as well.
Well, as far as a water reduction, that's substantial when you go to a xeriscape or a water-wise garden. So they're definitely going to feel a positive impact in maintenance and water bill. As far as cost,
I don't think it will have an added cost, like sometimes, especially if we're changing architectural requirements, there's a bigger cost implication. In this case, I think the availability of a variety of plant material at this point in time in Colorado will mean that there are some projects that that are already probably meeting our code, and through the landscape inspection program, what we've seen is that people have been very eager to move towards these kinds of principles and plant materials when you've been problem solving things that are dying or things that need to be replaced. So we're sensitive to the impact or how this is going to be received by the development community, and I think it'll be, I don't think there'll be a cost impact.
what I see is the rock might have a higher initial cost, but it lasts. They're not doing that repeated remulching every year, even when it's not necessary. And so I think there's savings there. We have seen the development community for multi-unit and commercial going toward this on their own. And we've seen them coming in as, with way beyond what we're asking them to do. So I don't think there's any problem with getting them on board to this. Now, occasionally, like, I'm starting to tend toward preferring inorganic material in the parkways or tree lawns. Occasionally, they still want to use turf. I'm seeing that so far, and that's acceptable. But yeah, I don't see a pushback in that way.
Great.
What I'm seeing in the landscape program is people want to go to this, even if it means a greater cost to begin with.
Yeah, I was gonna say long-term. it
Long
seems-
term.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how will this affect, like, in lieu of green space for developments?
The, like, parkland
Parkland,
fee
yeah.
in lieu, it won't change that at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
good
do
question.
we foresee us reverting any of public right-of-way to xeriscaping? Any areas that have significant grass?
Yeah, so we've talked about how we apply the non-functional irrigated turf in our own rights-of-way and parks, and that's been an ongoing conversation. We've been talking recently about some of the ground cover in our streetscapes, especially the narrow ones. So while you all know the zoning code applies to private property and not to the right-of-way, but we're going to be our own best role model.
I love that. I hope so.
Make sure that the streetscape design manual reflects similar principles.
Okay, and then the last question I had is, you had talked about that education and learning piece, as well as the guidebook. Are there going to be opportunities, like workshops and, kind of classes that could be offered to the community in regards
I
to
would
this?
love
or-
for that to happen. When I went out, the day I went out to kind of take a look throughout Wheat Ridge and take pictures, I happened to stop and talk to a homeowner who had just a beautifully xeriscaped yard, and he happened to be out in his front yard. And he's like, oh yeah, come see the backyard, I'll give you a whole tour. I'm like, would you be open to letting people see your garden? If we wanted to do some sort of garden walk to show people what could be possible. He's like, oh, that'd be a great idea. And he gave me his phone number, and he was all excited about it. So I think there's a really big opportunity, and not just one style, to include people who are, sensitive to pollinators and food growth, and just all those different opportunities. So, yeah, I think for one, that's one thing that the handout is intended to encourage as well, is like, these are possibilities of what you could do, and here are other resources that are available to you. There's a lot of resources out there, so many.
Yeah, so I think that's a component, particularly for those of us that aren't really well-versed in wanting to do this. Like, there's almost an overwhelming amount of information, and so, like, that piece would be amazing as far as offering that to the community of, like, here's what you could do, here are some options, and give a little bit more guidance. So I really appreciate that piece, and thank you for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Counselor Weaver?
Be a great Regenerate class for Regenerate Wheat Ridge with Park and Rec. Couple things. First of all, I think our compost rules was around where the compost could be and how big that could be. But couple things I was thinking of, and that is the ongoing maintenance. Because I think that, you know, to Councilor Dozman's point, it is harder than it sort of seems, having practiced xeriscape for a long time in different homes around the region. And there are some things that people often don't realize, like that you do have to water those plants like regular plants for the first couple years until they get established. And I think what has happened in other cities is that you know, these programs have rolled out and people have spent a lot of money and then not known how to maintain those things. So I think that's a really key thing. But also what the actual maintenance is, because I know we say they're very low maintenance going forward, but I have a rock garden in my driveway area underneath a elm tree, or excuse me, one of the historic elms in our community, and it is a nightmare to keep that thing, you know, blown out, and so it looks like this garden, and that is a reality, and I'm just kind of curious how we're going to think, you know, with traditional lawns, we can regulate how, if your grass is too long and all of that. How, when it doesn't look like this, how are we gonna think about that? Because my rock garden looks really bad until I clean up the mulch that has fallen into it from the leaves coming down. And it's not simple. So I just want us to be realistic about the fact that I went into this many years ago when I moved to Denver. Actually, lots of conversations with Councilor Aldean. And it's not quite as easy as I think we sort of, the maintenance of it. So I was just kind of curious if you all could speak to that on how we regulate it going forward, as far as the look we wish to achieve and where that goes over the code violation. Because I guarantee, just like we have people who don't trim their grass, there will be issues with, here's an example of a really nice looking water-wise yard. But you all could come over in the spring and see my, you know, but I can give you an example of something that looks really not very nice. And
I can too.
yeah, I'm sure. So just some thoughts on how we will think about that going forward.
Well, first thing I want to say is, I think that's why people have fully mulched yards, because they don't know how to find that balance in between. So they're like, I know how to put rock down, okay, that's easy to take care of, or I know how to have a total turf, and I know how to mow that. The difference is in between. So that is a learning process, even for those of us that are in this profession. I would never say that a perennial garden is simple. You know, it requires a lot of maintenance, and we can't have prescribed burns in our front yards or our rear yards, so there is maintenance involved. It's tricky when it's for low-density residential, because it's hard to tell people exactly what they need to be doing. You know, like, you need to, you know, you can't tell your neighbors how to manage their landscaping. So that is I mean, it's a challenge that we're going to face as we go forward.
I just want us to be ready on the code side
Yes.
of what it actually looks like 2 years in. Because some people will maintain them beautifully, just like they do their current yards, and some people won't. And so I just want us to be ready for that side.
It's definitely an education process, and even part of that is to get people thinking not to overplant what they're putting in, because that's usually what happens, is there's too much in there, or they don't even know anymore which things are weeds and which things are the things they planted, and so they just kind of give up. So,
I think we amended our code a while back to or define more clearly the difference between dead and living, and if you remember. So I think we have some of those parameters, but yeah, we'll look into that part too. Yep.
yeah.
Counselor Holteen.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So Counselor Weaver beat me to it. I think with Regenerate Wheat Ridge, this is a great opportunity. And I just want to Happiness Gardens report a little early tonight. There's some really great demonstration gardens at Happiness Gardens that we can direct people to go take a look there, what some of this looks like. We're doing good work in the city with that. And I just, kind of in response to some of the things Council Member Weaver is saying, I mean, this is like everything we learn as we go, and the intention here is that we have a water crisis, and we will, of course, create new problems as we try and solve the water crisis, but this is, to me, just a really solid step forward. And I know code enforcement is like the one place where I think, a lot of our city doesn't love how we interact with them. And so I just want to be mindful as we're in the learning curve on this, that, staff continues to exercise what, we see a lot of, which is good intentions and trying to, as you keep saying tonight, like, we're solving problems here. And, I've got 3 more years, and by the time these plants mature, it's going to be the next council's problem. So Dan, we get ready to solve this one. But, I mean, I think that's just what we do in the city, and we bring the learning curves back. And I really like moving forward with something like this that's just really saying, as a city, this is one of our values, is to really, respect our resources and make sure they're here for the next generation. And if that means, some messy conversations with code enforcement and having revisit some of this stuff in a couple of years, then let's do it. But like for now, let's move forward with saying, quit giving more water than you need to your monolithic grass. So thanks for all your work on this. I'm really excited. And I know Sustainable Wheat Ridge Committee that I just chatted with the chairs this morning are just really excited to see things like this coming through where we're taking leadership. So thank you.
Good.
Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have a couple of questions. Well, there's actually 4 I've written down here. The first one is for staff, and this, as the new council person, I'd like to know just a little bit about the background and why the city decided to follow this. I understand the importance of conserving resources, particularly water. But are we doing this to comply with the state law, or are there other motivations?
There is no state law that you can do this. There's actually state law that's proposed right now as far as like environmental answer. So we started looking at this, and then just a few months ago, I learned that someone had to look at a state law, and hasn't been approved yet. So we're right in line with what's happening on the state level.
And this was actually sponsored by Councilmember Ohm and probably a couple others. Mr. Ohm was the leading council member who asked to bring this forward.
I'm thinking of in 2022 HB 221151 directed municipalities to look at ways to conserve water. And okay, and it's really not that important. Just again, I wanted to get just a little bit of background of kind of coming into the middle of the game here, so I understand.
There's 2 main reasons that came up. One being the water concern for Western states right now. And, because working with the landscape program, and I didn't bring this up, we're working with the I don't have my. Working with the landscape program, I am consistently being asked, how can I make my landscape more water-wise and not contradict what was approved for my project? So there's changes I could suggest to them that was consistent with their approved plan. And then there were questions that came up as, what do we do if we want to change our landscaping to a more water-wise plan? And that has been pushing part of what we're considering in this revision to the ordinance. So we want them to be able to make changes. What if they don't have an irrigation plan? Then we need to, or they don't have irrigation to the islands in their parking lot. How are we going to address that and what's going to be considered acceptable? So those are the kind of things that have raised this. I'd say those are the two biggest things that have been pushing it. Not so much the residential, but the residential, the pieces that we're looking at for low-density residential are also things that have come up as questions from homeowners, so.
Is there any way that we're going to eventually be able to quantify some of the savings, the water reduction?
Boy, I have seen those. I've seen those kind of figures. I do not have them in my head right now, but it is substantial. I know that, like Castle Rock has a lot of information in this on their website, and they are both their water district and their city, so they can measure these things more easily. But I've seen anywhere from like 50 to 80% of potable water in Colorado goes to the outdoor landscape. And this is reducing it to, this could reduce it to 20%, or, you know, it's such a substantial amount of water use and then cost, so.
Well, and I'm sure it will be substantial, but again, it would be nice when we get to the point where we're actually changing our rules here in Wheat Ridge, that we could say, we're doing this because we anticipate X number percent reduction in water use across the city. That would be very helpful, yes. We've got a minimum on coverage for, these are low density. Is there a maximum? Did I miss something? Is there a maximum? You can't have like your entire front yard with native grasses and whatnot?
No, there's not. You could plant your entire front yard.
Okay.
Because
I
there's
don't know how you'd get into the middle of it to trim anything, but, yeah, but anyway, in the guidebook, I wonder if there's a way that in order, because part of the intent of the guidebook, if I understand correctly, is to encourage the low-density residents to think about things like replacing some of the turf, the natural turf, with water, water-wise products. And I'm wondering if there's a way to also include in there just some sort of how-tos on how, if you have your entire front yard covered with grass, whatever kind, Kentucky bluegrass, whatever it is, that there are things you can do to reduce the amount of water. Fairly simple. Instead of running the sprinkler for an hour, run it for 15 minutes. Most places I've looked at, when they talk about existing grasses, they will indicate that most grass is tolerant of less water. It just goes dormant. So if you reduce the amount of water that you're watering your front yard with, you're helping the cause. So the other thing is to keep in mind here too, that is that while it does seem like things, especially in the West, are moving toward more water-conscious ways of landscaping, there are some things to remember with turf, with regular turf, in that it does, it's a living plant, and so it absorbs carbon dioxide and it emits oxygen. It is a tremendous heat sink compared to, especially inorganic mulch. And then, just from the aesthetic point of view, I think if you ask 10 people to look at a picture of a house with a nice, well-maintained lawn and a house with a xeriscape, you'd probably get, at this point, a 50-50 split saying, I prefer one or the other. So I don't think we would necessarily want to demonize people that want to maintain a green front lawn. But I think we can certainly encourage them to be aware of how they may be able to reduce the amount of water they use. And then on the higher density detention pond issue, I may have missed it, but are we going in the direction of, this is for new build, not allowing the detention ponds to have turf, have grass? That's the kind of the direction, and I'm wondering, is there a way for maybe the plan to include turf in there that is maybe not watered as much? Because in many of the developments, apartment developments, that detention pond is used as kind of a dog run, and it is, sometimes kids play there and whatnot. So,
We usually have different standards for what can be planted in detention, and depending on the design, the detention area can't usually count as the landscape requirement. But you're right, there are different considerations in detention, the sand infiltration, sort of what types of plants can be in there. It can't just be all cattails, so just a slightly different code section that we usually refer to when we're looking at that area.
okay, thank you.
But also in the elimination of non-functional turf, it's specifically both the state version and any version I've seen, any like detention area that is used for active recreation is exempt from this being prohibited. Because sometimes, I mean, that's what open space is left on a site in our highly developed small lots, so, yep.
Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites. To answer Councilmember Larson's question about why this got brought up, there's a couple reasons. One was in Severance, Colorado, in January of 2022. They stopped issuing building permits because they ran out of water, and so that had a huge impact on all sorts of types of housing. And what I see a lot in these non-functional areas is that the water is just literally going down the gutter. And I would rather see that water go towards building, and having affordable housing instead of just going down the gutter. A lot of those streetscapes, nobody uses it, and so that's why it's really deemed non-functional turf. The other thing was in August of 2022, there's a memorandum of understanding between Aurora Water, Denver Water, the Metro Water District of Southern California, Pueblo Water, and the Southern Nevada Water Authority. And they wanted to introduce a program that said to reduce the quantity of non-functional turf grass by 30% through the replacement with drought and climate-resistant landscaping. And so that was something that has been going on for a while with the Colorado River, and so this is something that, and a lot of the turf that is in Colorado and Wheat Ridge is primarily Kentucky bluegrass, which is a high water grass. Unfortunately, very intolerant of not being watered. It just can't take it. It's not that type of grass, and that my intent was to have our city have a program where we're, like I said, we're reducing the amount of irrigation. We're also educating the public on different ways that they can design their landscapes. We're not forcing anybody to tear out their turf, but really to educate them, and hopefully they will consider using some type of more drought tolerant type of grasses. That's something that in my yard personally I have done, I haven't done it all, but there's a huge difference between getting rid of that Kentucky bluegrass, and it's not even that it's a 0% Kentucky blue, but greatly reducing the amount of Kentucky bluegrass, and you can see a noticeable difference in what can tolerate the heat, what can is greener just by having different types of turf. So that's why I'm very appreciative of staff and my fellow council members of supporting something like this, because this is really. And I've had other constituents ask me, because the other thing is the state of Colorado passed a turf replacement a couple of years ago, and that they want to know, like, how do we go about doing this, and that we're still kind of going through that. I know it wasn't just it wasn't the same type of program that Southern Nevada Water Authority had, where you could just go to them and they would give you money for turf replacement. This was something that I think originally started with cities and government entities and not so much the individual user, but I think maybe now that might be shifting a little bit. So that just kind of answers some of your questions. But that was the intent. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Counselor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites, and thank you, Councilmember Ohm, and I do appreciate you bringing this to our attention for us to bring to a study session. At this time, I'd like to ask for a consensus to move forward with staff recommendations on turf and low-density front yard recommendations.
I see a consensus. That's everybody. Awesome. All right, thank you. All right. Let's move forward to item number 2, Facilities Master Plan Overview and Recommendations.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Do you want hot ones?
There we go. No, it just means they're extra crunchy.
They're better. They're usually better when they're expired. Right. Find those in bomb shelters.
Twinkies, they'll be fine. Not gonna hurt you. It's not gonna hurt you any more than it was gonna hurt you.
We're pulling up our presentation on this, but, well, I guess we're not ready. Yeah, we lost me. Yeah, there we go. Everybody needs a break. I know. This is the most exciting one of the night. Yeah, probably.
Okay. Now, on to the long-awaited Facilities Master Plan Overview.
Thank you, Mr. Stites. We have Maria DeAndrea here, our Public Works Director, and also Dan Byers, our Facilities Manager. Been here a year yet? Almost? A little over a year. Just over a year. So a lot of changes in our facilities, thankfully. We're actually focusing much more on them. We have somebody that can actually do that. We never had a facilities manager for many, many years. And then Maria's brought a great amount of expertise and skills in this area too. So we're excited to present the report. We did an assessment of all of our, most of our facilities over the last year or so, or 9, 10 months. And we have some recommendations and conclusions for you.
All right, great. Yeah, Dan and I will be tag teaming tonight on the presentation. We also have representatives from Stantec Architecture here tonight in case there's any specific questions that staff can answer. So we'll go through the presentation and be able to answer any questions at the end. All right. Looks like we're missing a slide. All right, so kind of the phases of the study that we went through. We kicked off and had a visioning session with the leadership team for the city. So that included representatives from all the departments. Then we went through a series of interviews as well as site tours of all the buildings. So we sat down with each department and actually talked to them about their current needs and their current space, what's working, what's not working. And then went through a process to do some gap analysis and benchmarking, followed by alternatives development, and then finally the draft plan that you have that was attached to the report for tonight. Our overall goals were really about primarily service delivery. So how can we better serve the public? How can we use our facilities to create a warm and welcoming environment for everyone? And then thinking about our various needs as well. So sometimes, as you know, we use this space for large gatherings. We have meetings in here, just because we have so little meeting space within this building as well as others. And then just knowing how things have changed in terms of work, and so the ability to have both in-person and hybrid work situations, people having more and larger screens on their work desk, probably less paper, but more technology needs. So all of that was taken into consideration as we worked forward. And these goals were developed in conjunction with the leadership team to kind of guide the process to get to that final product. So I'll let Dan kind of talk through how we went through the assessment of the specific buildings.
So this map, oh, I'm sorry, thanks. This map shows the facilities that we primarily focused on, ones that you're familiar with. Did not include things like the historic park that we maintain. There are some, in terms of calculations, we did not really consider the leased property that my office is in, PNSB. So it's here, so we used it for, my understanding is we used it for kind of how much space we're currently occupying, but in terms of long-term planning, that's not part of the calculation because our lease is 5 years. I think we have 3 left. So just kind of a map here. You can see City Hall where we are, Active Adult Center. PNSB is in the upper right-hand corner. The Parks and Rec would be, what, is that no, it's not the rec. Oh, that's the Parks Shops area, Anderson Building, and then the Public Works campus on the left there. So these are this kind of a chart of the assessments of condition. We have a detailed assessment that's part of the facility master plan. It's not in the main plan that Stantec published, but we have these background documents that are available to all of you. It's pretty detailed, and they rate our HVAC systems, windows, roofs, siding, all the things that you would expect to rate, including technology and electrical. And those ratings are also weighted, so just kind of importance, a roof system is weighted more heavily than, say, technology systems. So going through all of those algorithms, they came up with 2 ratings, an actual rating, a numerical rating, and from there, they determined what they call an overall rating. I think the important thing to think about here is that a very poor rating is 1, a poor rating is 2, a fair rating is 3, and so on and so forth. And what you'll notice here in terms of these ratings is that they're essentially a rounding. So most of our facilities are under 3, meaning most of them are in the poor to fair range, and kind of rounding up. So you'll see in your facility master plan that you have attached to your package that they may actually rate those differently than what we have shown here, and that's partially because the subcontracted architect and how their assessments didn't line up. They rounded, where Stantec just said if you're under a 3, you're poor. If you're over a, if you're over a 3, you're fair. So some fairly low scores there. Another thing that I think I would add is that part of the reason that the Anderson Building rated so high is because it was renovated not that long ago. That included new siding, roof, and some new windows. The mechanical systems in that building were not updated at that time. And so this weighted rating may not paint the best picture. The good news is, in the last year, we've replaced most of those mechanical systems. And we're
On an
replacing
emergency
some
basis,
of them now,
yeah.
yeah. Is that-
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and just, the scale for the rating went from 0 to 5, just so you know that. So, again, that gives you kind of a sense that we have a lot in the middle right there and kind of starting to fall into that poor category. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the gap analysis. And I think one of the things that we took away or knew kind of going into this, again, the council, for the newer members of council, this was actually directed by council to go and do this study through the 2022 budget process. So that would have been in the summer, fall of 2021. And we were anticipating at that time having to move out just because we had exceeded the capacity of this building. So that's when the lease for the PNSB building came into play. We moved in there, I think, in the summer of 2022. So as Dan mentioned, that we have a 5-year lease on that facility, and we're about almost 2 years in right now. But really, we were expanding, we had outgrown our space, and this gap analysis really shows that. So the yellow represents what's existing in terms of the different, by departments. So we've lumped admin, city clerk, city manager's office, and community development together, so roughly this side of the building. We have municipal courts, parks and rec, police, and public works. And the yellow versus the orange shows existing versus what's currently needed. So that's today. Based on our current staffing levels, the spaces that we have available to us, it shows that significant gap. Those bars also represent both interior and exterior space. So not just the physical offices and meeting rooms, but we also have a need for exterior space, especially police, public works, and parks and rec. We have material storage, equipment storage, and so both of those numbers are reflected in here. So going forward, and those, as you can see there, so really looking at a 29% over what's existing for our interior space needs and 50% for our exterior. So Stantec looked at both our 5-year and 10-year needs. So that was, again, through that interview process, anticipating how many new staff we might add, any new programs or services. And so the yellow is the same yellow as what was reflected in this graph, so existing, not what's currently needed, but existing. And then the 2 greens represent the 5 and 10-year needs. So what you can see there is 5 and 10-year pretty close. They're fairly close because there's really not a whole lot of increase. But again, that gap is between the existing and where we need to be, either currently or within 5 years. And that represents, in terms of square footage, about 60,000 for interior space and 96,000 for that additional exterior space. So the other exercise we went through then is how do we solve that problem? What locations do we have? We're in a developed city, so our land space is limited. And so we got a little bit creative about how we could use our existing facilities as well as potentially expand or look at other areas to go. So out of the immediate need was really looking at, because that lease on the PNSB building will expire in about 3 years, and they may have other uses, Jefferson County Housing Authority may have other uses for that building, which is why I believe it was set at 5 years. But the intent here would be is to evaluate looking at moving into an existing portion of the Lutheran Medical Building. So on the current campus, which will, they'll be moving from there in August, is to reuse some of that existing space, remodel it, and put all of the administrative services from this building and PNSB into that new space. So not really constructing anything new, just kind of remodeling to make it work for the city services. Then another immediate need, we know that we need to enlarge the space at Public Works. Going through an analysis, it was determined that's probably a good place for it. And then we would co-locate Parks and Public Works together, but we need additional room to do that. Not just to house Public Works and what we currently do, but expand it obviously to incorporate parks as well. So one of our immediate action steps would be is to look at acquiring some land just to the south of the Public Works area right there. So that borders those properties that basically traverse between 44th Avenue and then up to where it touches the current facilities right now. And then that might give us another opportunity, instead of driving through the neighborhood, is to access directly onto 44th Avenue. Then, if we got everybody moved out of here and out of PNSB, the intent would be is to add on to the City Hall and reconfigure that to house both courts and PD. So we'd reuse the building, add on to it. We did some research, so there is, the Hayward Park here was acquired through Jefferson County Open Space. Therefore, there's a reverter on there on the property. So it's deed restricted in terms of they have to, we can't use it for any other purpose other than parks and open space. So our footprint here is fairly limited. And so we'd probably add on to the existing building instead of looking at somewhere else within this area. This is very centrally located as well, so it's a good place for police. It's a good place for people to come to courts just because it's on a bus line and relatively convenient. There would be a new parking lot added as well. And then finally, the final phase in the long term would be is to somehow re-envision a portion of the Lutheran campus and co-locate not only a new civic center, but also looking at potentially an amphitheater or some other cultural center there where you'd have a kind of a one-stop shop and start to kind of build along there 38th Avenue as that Main Street function. So right now, the current buildings for Lutheran might not be perfect in terms of facing onto 38th, but they'd probably meet our need in the short term. The intent would really be is to work on a building that would, again, interact with the street, kind of fit that context and what we envision for the future within 38th Avenue and connecting back to the east as well, and then into the park and whatever future development might occur there. So our timeline, again, the facilities master plan is really not even a 30,000 view, but more of a 60,000 foot view. So it's really to just get us started in thinking and to put some rough ideas and numbers on there. But the idea here is just to have a timeline about what needs to come first. So it's kind of like a game of dominoes where if this moves here, then we have to do this before the other pieces can fall in place. So the intent, again, would be to work to move administration and relocate all those groups to the Lutheran campus, allowing for the police and courts to kind of fill this space. Then the addition would come here at this place to get the police department settled. And meanwhile, we'd also be looking at doing that property acquisition for ultimately to build out a new campus for both Public Works and the forestry, parks, and open space staff. Yep. So my heart stopped when I saw this, and as I'm sure others did too. So again, very high level. We're really wanting to, and one of our next steps will be, is to really dig into these numbers a little bit more. But as you can see there, we're probably in the range of 200 and some million once you add up all of those different elements. That does not take into account right now property acquisition costs, but we are thinking that there may be some opportunities there to work with perhaps willing sellers and acquire those properties. So one of our next steps would be is to go through and really work on that refined scope and cost estimate. So that 156 million there, that first number, really reflects a very high dollar amount for site improvements at Public Works. That's a rough dollar per square foot, so it was just a calculation, how many square feet is out there. And so we want to dig into that a little bit more. That represents about 120 million of that 156. So we think that there's some opportunity to maybe look at that a little bit more, refine that, to get that number down quite a bit. So that would be our recommendation. Then secondly is, I know these discussions are already occurring with the city manager and others over at Intermountain Health, but looking at those future uses at the Lutheran campus and what we could possibly do there. And then finally, working on the acquisition of those parcels where there's willing sellers potentially to start to form the land needed for the Public Works and Parks campus. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have and stand by. Thank you.
Thank you, Director DeAndrea. Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. Director. So in 2002, when we were looking at our budget for 2003, and I asked council to support the amount of the money to do this, I knew that our facilities were in kind of bad shape, but I would say that this is extremely worse than I had anticipated. And here is why I think it's so important to understand these things. Let's just look at the police department, right? Trying to recruit into our police department, and we don't have proper training rooms, they don't have locker rooms, like those are things that other facilities have. And so it's like, you know, we want to make sure that we can get the staff and we can retain them and that we can be competitive employers. And our facilities are really part of that. And really, for me, what I was watching was people getting moved around and cubicles getting smaller and, you know, quiet spaces getting turned into offices and people starting to co-office. That's when I was like, wow, we really need to look at this. Like, this is, like, we really need to know how bad it is. So, you know, we are 47,000 square feet lacking in an interior space. That's not looking at 5 or 10 years from now. That's what we're lacking currently. We're 960,000 square feet lacking in exterior space. And yeah, that price tag's big. It doesn't really scare me though. You know, when we look at in the packet, and they're like project location phase and like 2023 costs, 2028 costs, 2033 costs, right? Like, to me, it seems like this is something we can do as long as we have an actual plan. We need to have a map on how to drive down the road and where our pit stops are, and also knowing that, geez, in 2028, we're gonna have a pretty built-out Clear Creek crossing that'll be bringing us some significant sales tax. We'll have, you know, our TOD site will be mostly done and built out, right? Like, we have things going for us in the future that, you know, we can support kind of moving down the road with this. And, yeah, when I looked at it in my packet, I was like, wow, I really didn't think that we were that bad off. So I'm glad that we went ahead and did the report so that we know where we're at. And, you know, I'm supportive with moving forward. I know that means we're gonna have to have some tough conversations in years to come in budgets, tough conversations in years to come on, you know, do we do something, you know, maybe when a sunset comes back up again, you know, stuff like that. But I think that we have to have those conversations. We want to be a competitive municipality and employer. I mean, that's part of our job is to, you know, make sure that our city can be competitive in those fields. And I think our facilities have got to be a part of it. And it is interesting to me, though, that when we did the polling, not very many people were supportive of a change to the rec center. But I think, in part, what we're looking at here with the facilities part, the reason why it's rating so low is because, you know, when people are supporting changes to the rec center, they're looking at the changes that they utilize as customers, and we're in this report looking at what our employees utilize. So, anyways, I'm supportive with moving forward with this. I appreciate all the work that went into it, and I'm really glad to have the information. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So, a couple questions I have, and I too am supportive of it. I understand all the different buildings and where we're at. Thank you for that report. One of the questions I do have, though, is on the large cost for the public works. Is that because of the equipment that needs to be stored, that there's gonna be some large, high ceiling building?
Covered parking?
Yeah.
No, so again, this was, I think it's site development. So I think bringing better electrical there, we know that that's underserved in terms of the needs for electric, drainage, and more just like redoing the parking lot areas. A lot of those things I think went into that number. And I think though, because it's pretty generic, that that's opportunity to really dig into that some more. But that does not include any covered parking, that
Okay,
number.
But like, what about for some of the big machines? Is it some type of structure for?
No, so no structures are involved in that number. Ultimately, that would be part of the, hopefully the remodeling part, but not that initial site development. So if we wanted to look at reconfiguring those buildings, right now, the recommendation is to reuse the buildings as they are and just remodel them. But as if you've been over there, they're somewhat separated, so I think there's some opportunity to look at maybe centralizing that, maybe reusing some of the buildings that we acquired as the admin buildings and just reconfiguring the site to some degree.
I would like to add that I do believe that the number, and correct me if I'm wrong, includes new buildings for parks. So like, we would replace the park shops, which are by far the worst conditioned buildings we have in the city, and that is part of that according to the spreadsheet. So there are building costs associated with that as well. But like, as Maria said, we both believe that there's a lot of opportunity there to look at that more critically and get those costs down significantly.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Dozman.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. It's very informative and kind of paints a bleak picture if we don't have these conversations sooner rather than later, but it's also a testament of, you know, doing the best we can with what we have. And so I think that we've been really nimble and flexible in utilizing spaces and partnering with other organizations that we work closely with in order to house all of our employees. And I agree that we do have a lot of developments that are going to be finalized in the next couple of years, and that's going to be generating a lot of tax revenue. And you know, our community has resoundingly supported a lot of improvements in our community, and I myself have been in the community really advocating for some sort of civic use on the Lutheran Legacy campus. I think that that would be a great like homage to our community and that property, that campus in and of itself. And I really would love to advocate also for having at least a short-term detention facility here for the police department. I think, you know, COVID really changed kind of the dynamic of how to house and detain people either on the short term or long term with Jefferson County. And so having that capability here in Wheat Ridge, kind of like Arvada and Lakewood does, I think would be beneficial for our community as we continue to grow. And for one, I think my biggest question would be, I doubt you'd bring this forward without having some of those preliminary conversations, but like, what is the feasibility of acquiring some of those properties, and how are those conversations going with Lutheran? And maybe can you give a little bit more background information about the properties near Public Works that we would be acquiring as well?
Sure. We have not reached out to them yet. So we did some preliminary work with a real estate broker to look at the pricing. So if there was consensus from council, we'd go back and examine that. And I think the reason we look to the south of us is that, again, that connection to 44th Avenue, and then also because of the condition of some of those properties and that they are actively potentially being redeveloped. So there might be an opportunity to go that and not necessarily, and it's more business related as opposed to single family homes as well. And then
Yeah.
I'll have Patrick talk to the
Yeah,
Lutheran.
that was pretty much it, but those properties are very unutilized if you haven't paid too close attention to them when you drive by, and so they probably are relatively inexpensive for, relatively speaking, compared to those numbers. So I think it's something that maybe we could phase into it, even if we're not gonna maybe make the consolidation or for a few years. It might be just something that if we can find the money to pick those up. That's one good thing about this plan that Stan Tech put together, that there is some phasing opportunities where we can't do this all at once. We know that. And that's why we went ahead and got a broker on board who could reach out, give us an idea what the sites are, what they're zoned, what the property ownership looks like. Then when it comes to Lutheran, we're not really in quite the details yet with what the future of the campus will look like, except for that master plan that we did, of course, several months ago. We are having regular meetings with them. We actually have a meeting next month, or next week, their 6-month countdown for moving. So, but again, there's still, Lutheran or Intermountain still owns the property. They don't have it up for sale yet. So it all depends on that partnership that we have with the future owner. And I believe that's where there will be hopefully some potential cost savings too, a public-private partnership with the redevelopment of that campus. The city's gonna have a lot of leverage because you're gonna have to rezone it. And also, in a couple weeks, we're bringing forward City Council Urban Renewal Plan adoption for the Lutheran campus, which will potentially generate significant amount of tax increment in the future, which will help the developer with the public improvements needed. So I think we have a lot of leverage there on relocating some civic uses on that campus.
And you kind of touched on my next question in regards to like where, and I know this will be a much broader conversation when we come to budget season and strategic planning for council, but like where do you anticipate coming up with this money, and how are we going to afford this, basically?
Yeah, again, I think it's gonna have to be phased over numerous years. There's different options. We don't have this money sitting aside right now. I back up a little bit. I think, some of you may be asking why did we take this long to start looking at these buildings? I've been here just 22 years, and the city was in no position 20 years ago to even think about expanding or redoing our municipal buildings. We were really focused on increasing our fiscal sustainability for the city overall. I didn't believe it would be very selfish if we were focusing on upgrading our city facilities when a lot of our public infrastructure was not in a proper state. So we've done so much over the last couple decades. I think the city's in a much different place. You mentioned the support we're getting from our community for bond initiatives. So there's different financing mechanisms. I think we could do some things with our general fund budget. We could do some things with COPs where you don't go to the vote of the people. You can put up the rec center as collateral. You can get some money from that. We could do another bond initiative. Again, the public-private partnership, I think, is the key on the Lutheran campus to try to get those numbers down to a level that we can't afford. And it would be some long-term lease probably also there.
Thank you. Councilor Weaver.
Thanks, and thanks for doing this work. I agree with all of my co-counselors on all the things that have been said, and I think we do have to look at this. And the number isn't, we're talking 10, 15, 20 years in the future of what we need right now, but we have to start making those steps. And I kind of feel like I didn't happen to have kids, but I know I have many friends around this table who did, and of course, if you look at the cost of them, you don't really get excited about it, but it doesn't mean you don't want to do it, right? So I think we just have to look at the fact that we've done a lot of great things in this community, and to all of your points, we also have to sort of, we're ready to sort of say, okay, and we need to house all these things appropriately now and get there. So we will, and we'll figure it out, and I'm super supportive of going forward, and I'm really excited about being able to use Lutheran. I think that's also part of the buy-in that we will get from our community is some of the thoughts around the historic piece there, and there's just a really great opportunity to create this new center of government, which is super exciting, actually. So, thank you.
Let's go, Councilor Holteen.
Thank you, everyone who's worked on this. I can only imagine how much work it was. This conversation reminds me a little bit of a recent conversation we had about maturing xeric landscapes. In that, if we don't do the right investments in our infrastructure, we're just going to be piecemealing, and we are going to have code enforcement yelling at us because we're not tending to our gardens. And we've done a great job of working with what we have and being opportunistic around being able to lease the building with the complicated name. And so, you know, we're a scrappy and I think resourceful city, and that's why we've been able to get this far. I will admit I didn't read every word of this, but I actually did look at it pretty closely. But it was actually tonight just being reminded that like the size of our computer screens have changed. And we're in facilities that like weren't assuming we'd even have computer screens at our desks, and we feel it on the dais. It's tight on the dais. I mean, I enjoy my peers, but I mean, we're I mean, you may not realize this on this side of it, but we're squished up against each other, and we've got our computers, and so I think recognizing, you know, even just sort of that simple nod to, you know, we've not just grown as a city, but we've functionally like outgrown the space. And so I think what's exciting about this is that we have a lot of sort of nimble opportunities to not have to solve the entire problem all at once. There, you know, are other cities right now building entire new civic infrastructure, and that's gigantic. So I think, you know, this is a great way for us to be able to, you know, start going after it. And the couple of sort of, I guess, not just rambling reflections, but contributing thoughts. I think overall, much in the same way that this building wasn't imagining computers on everybody's desk, I'd really love for us to be reimagining how we're utilizing parking as we look at all of these. And somewhere in the report, it said something about like there's insufficient parking at this location for events. Well, we've got this gigantic parking lot across the street. And the thought that we would need to accommodate parking for one-off events when we're really trying to move in a lot of ways towards like encouraging people within our community to feel like they can safely walk, ride a bike, not have to drive to our civic spaces. So really I encourage as we move forward with sort of this flexibility, how are we being flexible in terms of our outdoor space I mean, I realize we gotta park our public works things. We can't be super creative that way, but let's really like rethink our parking demand. Cause if we are thinking 20, 30 years into the future, I'd love to think that we aren't gonna need as much parking. And then a second piece, I was catching up with a friend of mine who was the mayor pro tem in El Paso. And he was talking about as they've invested in civic space, any type of land that the city owns, when they do any work on it, they reimagine it for families and as public space for people to enjoy. And so as we do go through this, like, you know, we want to be cost effective and utilitarian, but I think continuing that legacy of being creative and like, you know, sort of nimble, really reimagining that every civic space is actually for every member of our community in some respect. So how are we, you know, maximizing that as much as possible? And then please do not build any more blue water fountain pond things like we have out here. But I'm supportive of this. I know it's a huge, I mean, I gulped a little bit, and I was in real estate development. I know these numbers are big, but I also know that if we don't move forward and have a plan, to Councilmember Hoppy's point, these are going to get astronomical, and a lot of them are going to be sinks into like functionally outdated properties we are utilizing. So instead of sinking money, I'd rather invest it and have the pride in the community that I have, and I know a lot of our people do. The one little niggly thing on it overall is it's so dispersed, in that it doesn't have that like we are here presence. And so I think that just really underscores that moving forward, you know, should we be able to, you know, have a presence on the Lutheran, you know, re-envisioning that, I think really, really bringing a lot of civic pride to that space, since we're not gonna have, like, you know, you go to Arvada and like Arvada is there, you know, like most of our peer communities have like a more centralized. And so recognizing that this is pretty dispersed, you know, has sort of some disadvantages to it, so.
And that's definitely still an option. We could still have the police and court on the Lutheran campus, along with admin. Parks and Rec would probably need to stay somewhere else, because you know, a lot of that's outdoor storage. I don't think that's what we envision for the Lutheran campus, but yeah, that's one thing that it's been very hard for me to talk about dispersing. I like everybody the same. I like to be able to walk down the hall and talk to the chief. So, you know, I think that's still an option.
Did anyone look at the property across from Anderson, the True Green and that truck?
Stantec did, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, so they did a little matrix of potential sites for co-locating parks, either co-locating or looking at moving parks potentially somewhere else, and that was one of the sites identified. I think the cost of that, because it's a commercial property, probably exceed the benefit there, and it wasn't quite the right size still, even for all the outdoor storage that's needed.
Okay. All right, well, supportive of this and looking forward to creative ways to, you know, be cost-effective with it, but also recognizing we can finance things. And when I bought my house, I would not have been able to pay for it. And here I am, living in it, enjoying it. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. If you were to start today and say, okay, let's get going, what would the priorities be? What would the sequence of sort of facilities changing? What would happen?
You want to start, Maria? I was just going to say, I think if we're serious about some of these pieces, I believe picking up those properties off of Wadsworth or 44th for the public workshops before they are redeveloped. Otherwise, it's going to cost much more. I just think that's probably a no-brainer to expand that campus where it is, in my opinion. And second step would be serious negotiations with the new owner of Lutheran on what is the ability for us to relocate there. That's my two priorities. Maria?
Yeah, very, very similar. I think we have the opportunity to potentially acquire some of those properties, and we might be kicking ourselves in a couple of years if we don't go after those and at least try.
And the transition to a justice center here, and could you explain again to me so I understand? It would just involve remodeling this building and not expanding?
No, there would be an addition needed. So, and to speak to Councilmember Dozeman's point, so right now we don't have a sally port, so a place where to basically bring people in and out, not only for courts, but if they were to arrest somebody, they're taken directly to Jefferson County. So there's no detention facility, there's no secure place to bring prisoners in or out of this building. And so a lot of the addition would be some of those kind of standard almost police-related functions. Then we have a need for an enhanced locker space, wellness spaces, so workout places, and just overall PD is one of the 3 areas that requires the most additional office and meeting space. So admin services also in this building, but then Public Works was the largest. But really, PD has a large interior need and exterior too. So we have the parking lot out here now for our existing vehicles. We need that to be secure. So not only for the city vehicles, but for police employees' personal vehicles as well. So there is some susceptibility now because they're open and available, so you can walk around them. So it's all of those that we would envision and rework the space with an addition.
Thank you, and that leads to the next question. Could you help me understand how you define exterior versus interior? Because the exterior looks like immediate needs are almost double where we are now.
Correct. So interior would be anything within the walls of the building. So additional office and meeting rooms, smaller conference rooms, so 4 to 5 people. So as well as additional storage space. So we have a lot of storage right now in the basement of this facility, but the elevator doesn't go to there. So it's a lot of manual lifting and carrying boxes up and down. So it's somewhat unusable from that perspective. Exterior is really, again, about material storage and equipment storage. So having to right now up at Public Works, we have a lot of our equipment just sits out, as well as parks, so they have an elevated, or one of the boom trucks that goes up in the air to trim trees. It's too large to even fit in any of our facilities, and so it continues to get damaged because it's out in the weather, mostly from rodents nibbling on the electrical things, but it's things like that. So just, you know, as we get larger, we're storing more materials, like our streetlights for now, which used to be Excel owned and maintained. Now we take care of those, so we need to have a surplus in case one gets knocked down. It's all of that stuff that kind of combines together.
So it is mostly places where things can be stored that things, assets that the city controls.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay, but it does really sound like this isn't just, you know, like, hey, let's do something. This is really needed. And my compliments to the folks at Stantec, because the facilities master plan, this interim report is tremendous. A lot of work went into it, and it's not just say, hey, here's some good ideas, but there's some survey material. There are lots of research that went into this, so my compliments to that, and I'd like to see us pursue this as diligently as we can.
Counselor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites. Just really quickly, something that's come into my head during this discussion with this presentation, which is great, by the way, thank you, is just, this is a testament to the resilience of our staff, our city staff, and how they have been so, I mean, our staff are fantastic anyway, and just to have that attitude of, yep, I can share a desk, or yep, I will work here for 2 hours, or I'm sure those conversations go on all the time, and so I want to say, a big kudos to all the staff for that, but also realizing that I think the secret's out, and Wheat Ridge is a great place to be, and our city is just going to continue to grow. And so as we move into that and realizing kind of to what Councilmember Hoppe was saying about, you know, plan for growth and realizing that there are many other municipalities out there that may have, you know, cooler facilities, we're going to get there and have something great too. So I appreciate that. So thank you so much.
There, if I could real quick, yeah, I think we're always fairly proud of being scrappy, right? And as frugal as we could, and I think everybody, you were right, everybody did chip in. It's like, yeah, let's what's the next closet we can take over for, right? But there's a certain point where that stops, and I mean, there's more regulations and laws now about bathroom facilities, what type you have to have, and we don't hardly meet any of those anywhere. So there's just a lot of more considerations today. And you've all been very supportive of bringing on additional programs and staffing, and that has just taken us over that level. It's like we have no more closets. But yeah, it was. I think it was pretty interesting how great staff was by making do with what we had. But I think because we had to over the years, I think we're at a different spot where we can start looking at things like this.
Thank you. Before we go back to a couple people, I want to agree that, you know, when my grandfather was the mayor here, he was, you know, known as being frugal. You know, I used to call him cheap, but some people thought he was frugal. But, you know, when I was first elected, I remember this conversation we had about and I could just hear Hank's voice in my head. Well, did you reuse all the offices? Is everything being, and like the answer is yes, right? Everything is being used, and I think even our more conservative, older, you know, residents who don't usually love seeing the city get new stuff. I think we're to the point now where we're like a real city, and we need to start kind of like it was cool for the first 50 years to be that scrappy up and comer, but now we're to a point where we need to you know, the next chapter, right? We need to turn that page and start becoming the real city that we are. Hey, you're welcome. All right. So let's go on to Councilor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stites. Yeah, you know what, Wheat Ridge, we can have nice things. I mean, we really can. And since our last brooms have been evicted from their closets, brooms have been evicted from their closets. So what I'm asking though is, so we need to formally adopt the facilities master plan, or we need to ask for a consensus to adopt the facilities master plan, and then my expectation is with the adoption of that plan, then you guys come back to us with next steps. We've moved forward to look at this is what this looks like, this is what it costs, do you want to, is that?
Yeah, and I don't think a specific adoption of the plan, but
Mhm.
maybe consensus to accept the findings and to ask staff to move forward with.
And to
Because, you know,
utilize it
we
as
may-
our roadmap?
We may
or-
want to change things and,
Yeah.
to different recommendations,
Sure.
but yeah, it's a great start. It's where we needed to get to, and,
Okay.
yeah.
I'd like to ask for consensus that we.
Hold on, I think.
Oh, sorry,
Councilor
go ahead,
Holteen
Rachel.
Did you? Oh. Oh, well, let's go. Okay. Counselor Holteen had
Right.
one thing first.
Thank you. I hate to interrupt a good consensus. So I know this is probably a little bit early, but I will register it now and continue every chance I get. You know, we have an opportunity here to, you know, we are investing in ourselves, and so I think it's really important that I'm registering now that we are, you know, really working towards making sure this is, you know, a building of the future, and we're thinking
Mhm.
about net zero buildings and how are we leading with our values, both in terms of making those investments like sustainable and cost-effective long-term and aligning with the values we have around resources. So I just, as we continue to move forward with different iterations and more specificity in this, I want to make sure that that's getting registered as something that's important across those. And then I just want to say, like, I'm sitting here and thinking about, like, the day I walked in and the pictures had all been replaced in here and what a difference that made. And I'm sitting here thinking about, in 10 years, what it'll feel like for the, you know, people in our community to come and, you know, engage in our civic spaces. And, you know, we do better than our peers in our citizen surveys. And a lot of that is because we are providing good services and good service to our citizens. And this is one way, there's a direct correlation to the quality of employment and employee services and the quality of life our citizens have. And if we want to continue doing better than our peer cities on community review through the programs we're giving them, then we have to make this investment. So just wanted to register the net zero and sustainable investments in that, and that's all I have to say tonight.
All right. Let's kick it back to Counselor Hoppy for a consensus.
I'd like to ask for a consensus to move forward with the recommendations and to give staff direction to move forward to next steps on our facilities master's plan.
That is unanimous. Excellent. All right, let's move on to number 3, staff reports.
I don't have anything else this evening, thank you.
That was easy. Let's go elected officials reports. Do we have anybody want to raise their hand? And Counselor Holteen?
Happiness Gardens report. It was really, this is the best Happiness Gardens report I think I've ever had. So this last Friday, there was a special ceremony commemorating a mother patch that has been placed at Happiness Gardens. And the mother patch is, basically a piece of soil, like, think of a big gigantic rock, but it's soil that is cultivated entirely from flora and fauna indigenous to the area, specifically centered around the bison and buffalo. And it's a partnership with Denver Mountain Parks, in which they literally cultivate, you know, big cow patties from the buffalo and bison that Denver Mountain Parks maintains the 2 herds. And they use those to cultivate with local mycelial networks, mushrooms, and different just sort of compost from native indigenous species to our area. So they create this just like really place-based piece of earth, and they planted it at the base of the old plum tree, which is adjacent to the pavilion at Happiness Gardens. And on Friday, there was a ceremony with representatives of indigenous peoples and tribes, and then Denver Mountain Parks were there, of course. Councilmember Ohm was there, our own Parks and Recreation, and then several community members. And we gathered in a big circle for about an hour, and we put our good intentions into a shared blessing that myself and the Mountain Parks gal got to place in there. And it was just really a beautiful expression of what makes Happiness Gardens so special, and that it brings community together. It's around bringing intentions and like trying to restore and sustain, who we are way back. This was a way back before a lot of, what we associate with Wheat Ridge was there. So when you walk by Happiness Gardens and you see the old plum tree next to the pavilion, just know it is a really particularly special little place. And it takes a couple years for the mycelial network for that to come out. But what happens is it then digests the non-native things, such as the leaf droppings from the plum tree, which is not native to the area. So it actually helps sort of, the Happiness Gardens actually operate a little bit more effectively. So it was a really special occasion, and just representative of a lot of the good things we're doing here in the city. And that a lot of times there's magical little things you don't see that make Wheat Ridge special, but your neighbor might know about them. So chat with your neighbors more, find out what they're up to. And that's my Happiness Gardens report.
Thank you. Counselor Hoppy.
I guess my report could be summed up as Wheat Ridge High School. So at the farm, there's some really exciting things that have happened over the last 2 weekends. Our wrestling team took 3 second-place league titles and 1 third-place league title, which is great. Our esports team took first-place league. And our POMS team went to nationals over this last weekend, and for the first time in program history, advanced to semifinals in POM and advanced to finals in their game day performance and took 8th in the nation. Yeah, super exciting. This week is Soulflower Week, and it is a week where Katie was a young lady that actually my older girls went to school with. She passed away from cancer, and her parents have a nonprofit that they do where they do make a wish, but they pick a teen. And so all week long, leading up to the Sadie's dance, they do things like tonight you go to the Raising Cane's. They do different events. It was beach day today, but Wednesday, the Optimist Club is going to be there doing their annual breakfast, pancake dinner from 4:30 to 7:30, and then the basketball teams, girls and boys, will be playing Green Mountain. So if you want to go and support the Optimist, Project Soulflower, and some basketball teams, Wednesday is the day to do that.
All right. Anybody else? Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We had a fantastic discussion tonight. I appreciate all the staff members and everybody for coming to speak. And we will call, Councilor Larson.
Thank you. A couple of things I'd like to announce tonight. The first is we have a date. Council member Dozman and myself have a date for our first District 4 meeting of the year, and we're looking at April 2nd at the Anderson Building in Anderson Park. More details on that to come. And then the second thing is that on the day after our last council meeting, Amanda in the city's public relations department issued a news release describing the Green at 38th project that will get underway. Construction gets underway in June of 2024. And that project is receiving some funding from the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, the Energy and Mineral Impact Fund, which is fueled by state severance tax on energy and mineral production, along with a portion of the state's royalties from federal mining and drilling activities. And given the fact that there are no mines or oil wells in Wheat Ridge, I think that's fairly tremendous. And I think it's a tribute to the state's oil and gas industry and the amount of revenue that it generates for the people of Colorado. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Sorry. Oh, one more. Councilor Snow.
Very quickly, this Thursday is the Wheat Ridge Active Transportation Advisory Team is holding a State of the City event at Esther's. Please come out. This will be a good time to talk a little bit about 2J and hear some updates, but also, make sure that folks are, aware of the AT-ATs and what they do for our city, and so making sure that everyone knows. So Esther's at 6 p.m. looks like. Should be a good time. That's all I got.
Anybody else going once? Oh, no, okay. Counselor Hom.
Yeah, District 2 meeting, February 24th, 10 to 12 at the Grange.
All right. Now going once. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.